everyone. So glad to see you here today. I'm joined today by Chris Wilson from Stress Science. And we're wondering, are you a teacher or a leader? And are you caught in a space where you know that your life's not healthy, something's not quite right, and you know you need to take action, but you don't know what action that might look like? So join me today. We're going to talk to Chris and see what insights he's got from a very different perspective. So welcome, Chris. It's great to have you on.
Rowena, thank you so much. Good to see you again.
And do you want to tell everyone a little bit about you?
Okay. Well, I am of a vocational education background, so 10 plus years in colleges and DETLs and assessors, internal verifiers, IV background, really in the sports science realm. So very much looking at sports development, and then moving those learners into higher education, which is also where I done my research into what we call multi-stressor environments based around military and sporting populations.
Wow. Did you say multi-stressor environments?
Yeah, so typically we would look at, if we took altitude, physical activity, sleep deprivation, hydration levels, nutrition, all these factors have an impact on the stress response in the body, the inflammatory response in the body, and this can, be have a considerable amount of impact on performance.
Yeah. So I think the teachers and leaders listening to this, and I know there's parents listening and others, they'll be fascinated by that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've based your solutions around a specifically sports model and how that would apply for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, a little bit of further background was I had a PhD lined up, but we were very fortunate enough to be sponsored to move to Australia, hence the twang that I've got, which is a mixture of English and Australian. And so I spent 10 years in Australia really building out this model, but in the corporate space. But I kept the fundamentals the same, which was, in that typical sporting model, we would identify the measures, then we would do a baseline measure, we would offer an intervention, and then we would do another set of measurements to look at the change over time. So in the corporate space, if I looked at stress markers, I would take saliva samples and measure your cortisol and your immune response. Then I would do a coaching program. My program was called Performance Acceleration. And then we would measure at the end of the program to see how your stress and immune markers have changed over time.
Wow. So it is quite science-based.
Yeah, absolutely. The subjective nature and the broad nature of stress. When we talked about multi-stressor environments, it wasn't just am I stressed or am I not stressed? The factors that come into play could be environmental, could be chemical, could be emotional, physical, as well as psychological. And we have to consider all of those.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So how can we bring this down to earth to us mere mortals who are primary and secondary teachers or normal people in normal language that would help people to understand a little bit about how that works? Because I know you've talked to me about 3 levels.
Yeah, that's right. So look, I understand the technical nature of the language, but we are very much around it all the time. In fact, what I'm loving at the moment is that the literacy around, we're wearing watches that tell us about heart rate variability and sleep index scores, and the health literacy at the moment for us mere mortals is fantastic. And that means that these conversations that we're having today, people have got this. I go into schools, I hear students talking about it and learners and teachers, and it's fantastic. So what it boils down to is that after hundreds of hours of coaching and running my individual program, my coaching one-on-one program, I realized that self-regulation, which is the first level, it wasn't enough. And giving people more tools and more steps to do was never really getting them over the line. It wasn't making that shift in the data that I was really looking for. So what I ended up creating or designing was this idea that self-regulation is the first step, co-regulation is the next level that we look for, and then finally we would look at what we call organizational regulation. And if I broke that down for you, can I give you an example, Rowena? So let's say I've got a department and I've got 10 individuals within that department. I would work one-on-one with 10 individuals. We would give them the tools that's required. Sleep strategies, being mindful, breathing, all these wonderful things that we've learned and are at hand all the time. But the next part is the co-regulation piece, and this is where the support mechanisms start to come in. Once we get that uplift of information and awareness with 10 individuals, we can then start to hold each other accountable for this improvement in well-being.
Okay.
And so if I call it team dynamics, this co-regulation allows us to then work towards a collective goal and hold each other accountable. And it could be a well-being goal, could be a performance goal, it could be just getting through the term goal, whatever it might be for our team.
Okay, can I just ask you quickly before we go on to the third level?
Yeah,
so
please.
from a co-regulation point of view, are you testing cortisol levels before and after that sort of intervention as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we do is with the individuals, we can collect the data. And then, of course, as long as we've got a minimum of 5 to protect, because we don't want to be able to weaponize data, we want to protect the individuals, we can then aggregate and anonymize that data set to then look at a risk profile in the teams.
Wow.
And then to go one step further in the organization, we can then look at departments and start to look at where the risk profile is within the departments in the organization.
And that's risk of stress, risk of overwhelm, burnout, stuff like that?
Yep, absolutely. Because when you look at our stress zones that we talk about, we've got a healthy zone, which often we would talk about our bandwidth. Then we go into what we call the early warning signs zone, which is when our negative stress starts to show up in a physical, mental, and emotional way. Then we go into the overwhelm zone, and then finally we would go out into that burnout zone.
And you can see in our cortisol levels, can you, which zone we're in?
Yeah, we can. And it's surprising, we talked about the mere mortals conversation. As beautiful and technical as this sounds, it's actually a very powerful behavior change tool.
Yeah.
Because if I ask people, if I've got my net promoter score or my annual well-being survey that goes out to my teachers, and I don't want to mix the pot, or I don't want to say negative things about the school. So what we do is we just go, yeah, everything's great, thanks very much. But when we start to take physiological markers, it can then start to indicate that even though the subjective scores say one thing, the physical and mental scores might suggest something else.
Yeah.
And that's the power of coaching, holding a mirror up to the client, to the individual and to the team and go, this is currently where we're seeing the team sit. What can we do about that?
Yeah, because I think a lot of staff aren't entirely sure that they can be fully honest in a well-being survey anyway, because they're scared of repercussions, and you can't lie if it's a test of your spit or whatever it is.
Absolutely. I hear it all the time. I'm in amongst schools, and so I'm very much aware of the conversations that happen in staff rooms and in the classrooms and around the school environments. And it's true. Collectively, we want to be the best we can for our schools and for our learners. And that also means putting on a brave face and just getting on with it and toughing it out.
Yeah. But the reason this is so important, Chris, or one of the reasons, well, I mean, there's lots of reasons actually, now I think about it, because we're all precious and we're all important and valued, aren't we? But also students, research says, do so much better if teachers are doing better. It's kind of obvious, but it's also the truth.
It's right. I'm cautious of opinions, but I've got so many, Rowena.
Okay.
But it is that. It's how, we want the best for the learners. I don't know many teachers that don't like teaching. We're in it for a reason, and we love this whole taking the learners through the journey and giving them the best opportunities that they could possibly have. But there's a lot of outgoing there with that mindset, and that is that I'm willing to sacrifice self to make sure that others achieve.
Yeah.
When we know it's the reverse that's true, and that is that if I'm in the best possible state that I'm in mentally, physically, and emotionally, then my projection and my perception changes significantly on the positive. And therefore, the learning environment that we expose the learners to is much more, I'm cautious about that bit. We can't always guarantee, but typically it would be a much better environment for learning.
It has to be, really.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's so. Tell us about the third level.
Yeah, the organizational level. This is a culture shift. And in education, we might see that there's silos, and I understand it, but I struggle with it when I go into schools and I see that we sort of come in the morning, we have that little, God, I can't believe my day. Oh, God, I've got that class. Oh, no, he's going to be or she's going to be a nightmare. And then you go off and you run from class to class all day. And then you're basically on your own running from class to class. And then you might come back to the staff room for lunch, or you might just want 5 minutes on your own. And then you do your admin and you go home. And I look at that and go, we are creating silos inside this culture. And it's really difficult for us to get, that feedback and to get that interaction when it comes to a cultural acceptance of, what does it look like? How do we perform best? What else can we do? Do you need support? Is there anything that I can do for you? Remember that co-regulation piece does require teams to come together, not just on a PD day once a year. It's that regular occurrence of, how can I help you? What do you need? How do we work collectively? And it has to be a top-down model. Now, if I look at the organizational regulation piece, I'm looking at the senior leadership team. Let's say it's a trust, so I'm looking at board level. I'm starting to get into those to look at, right, what is the strategy? What is the strategic roadmap? What does it look like for our teachers and our learners? And how do we measure success out of those? And that's where we get the culture shift.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit what the culture shift might look like? So if you're listening and you're exhausted and you're burnt out and you're just in survival mode, there's no sign of any thriving anywhere. What would you be saying to those people?
Yeah, and that is more common than I'd love to say out loud. Is often, as a stress scientist and a coach, I would get called in and say, hey, Chris is struggling. Can you help Chris? And then by the time I speak to Chris, Chris is quite far down the rabbit hole. And so we have to unravel a few things or make some small shifts, incremental shifts, because from a physiological perspective, if I'm running on fumes, then my body has already gone through a lot of adaptation physiologically and psychologically. And so to get to that point, we might have to just do what we call like an active recovery period, where we keep people ticking away, we do some regression, we slow things down just to catch your breath before we can go again. And I don't know many environments, and I'd love for someone to contact me and show off and show me how amazing their environments are, but I don't know many environments in the learning and education sector where I can put my hand up and go, do you know what? I'm really puffing out here. I might need a bit of additional support, or I might need to step out, because typically what it ends up being is I'm just going to be sick. I'm just going to phone up at 7 a.m. in the morning, going to call the hotline and say, do you know what? I'm just not coming in today. And that tells me a lot about the culture of the organization. And I say organization, I don't want to say schools or colleges, or as a whole, the organization.
So what would you be looking for, Chris, in a really healthy organization where cortisol levels, when you test, are amazing, are healthy? What would you be seeing?
Yeah. Do you know, we're not trying to avoid stress. And you'll never hear me say that. Stress is absolutely beautiful. It's a vital thing for all of us. But it's the constant load of negative stress is where we start to get the detrimental effects. Now, that might have been not the technical talk there is, we want people to be challenged. We want people to be stretched, and we want people to work hard and do well. These are all things that we love. We expect our learners to do it. We certainly expect our teachers to do it. But within that, have we got an environment where people are enjoying the challenge? I'm not saying we all have to run around laughing all day. I'm saying that we have to embrace the challenge. And have we got clarity about where we're going and why we're doing this? I reflect on the language I've been hearing around the schools I'm working with in my area, and I can hear this. How long have we got left? You know, things are changing so rapidly in education. We don't have any money anymore. There's a real tension at the moment. And there's a little bit of a pay rise, yeah, but is it enough? And we've got this tension around, are we enjoying where we are, and are we clear about why we're doing what we're doing? Now, of course, we're there to educate the next generation. We are there to create opportunities for them. Of course we are. But we also need our teachers to be in a position where they are, or at least they feel like they can fulfill their obligations in the best possible state to prepare that next generation for their challenges. And these are the sorts of things that I look for when I come into organizations, Rowena. I start to look at the language people use, the behaviors that we start to see, and are they aligned to the words down on the wall? I'm always cautious about the fact, Chris, this is a fantastic place to work. Everyone loves here. We communicate so well. People tell us how much they love working with us. And then you just go down the corridor and speak to a few people, and they're like, no one tells us what's going on. Things are changing all the time. So these are the indicators that I like to measure when we go in at an organizational level. How invested are the leaders to support the teachers in what they're trying to achieve?
I love that.
I understand where people go. I'm using broad stroke language in our short conversation. I understand there's budget. I understand there's lack of resource. I am aware of that. And that is a challenge that we would have to face and tackle. I can't just blanket information for everyone. I think that's where I frustrate a lot of people. They go, Chris, is it the red pill or the blue pill? Which one do I need? It's like, well, it really depends. I need to come in and gather information. It is a scientific approach. So we need to look at the landscape for you, measure the benchmark, see where you're at, and then see where we can take you.
Isn't that interesting? A piece of research I read recently was talking about the impact of staff, or any of us actually, being given a challenge that we own. So being given that opportunity of some autonomy. And I think especially in schools where we're told very prescriptively a lot of what we have to do. And I remember a time when I was deputy, I think, and I was just completely overloaded. But I found a thing on the government website to say, do you want to apply for apprentice teaching assistants? And this is the process, and you can then help your whole community of schools. And everyone thought I was mad going for it. We were very short of teaching assistants. We didn't have much money, and I love training anyway. So it was a joy to be able to train these young people. But everyone thought it was crazy that someone who was already overloaded took on this project, but it was like an extra passion project, and it gave me energy. It was amazing.
Yeah. And we talk about it, don't we? So we're bogged down and we can't see the light through the trees, if you want to use, whatever you want to use for that. Well, when we're in that state, we have to consider this. So I'm in a state of overwhelm. The pressure it feels like it's pushing me down and down and down. And I'm supposed to be empathetic. I'm supposed to be joyous. I'm supposed to want to go that extra mile for everyone else. And it's almost impossible to do that in a state of overwhelm, because I become survivalistic. I become very internal. And it's impossible for me to look externally and go, wouldn't it be great if I just done a little bit more for others? And that's really the piece, is that if we can find something that really ticks a box for you, that invigorates you, that starts to get your focus and motivation again. It could be a side project. It could often be a passion project. I met a beautiful woman who was crocheting, and she started to bring her crochet into the school because her external passion project become an internal support. She used to make toys and things for learners with anxiety or concentration, what have you. And I just thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And you just saw her energy lift whenever she spoke about crochet. And it was just something that was external that she decided was she was going to bring into her work environment inside schools. And it was great.
Yeah. Love
Hmm.
that. So before we finish, Chris, could you give us one or two tips for teachers, leaders who are listening to this and saying, I don't think my school's got the money to bring you in, but certainly we'll give you contact, how people can contact you if they're interested in that. But what would be
Hmm.
the top tips that you might be able to share with people that you've learned through your experience?
Yeah. So if I think about my three levels, the first one is self-regulation. Now, if I stood up, and I have done PD days for teachers, so I can speak to what I know, and that is, if I've got 100 teachers in a room, I would say to them, you want to improve your well-being in the next 48 hours, what can we do? They would give me this comprehensive, beautiful list of everything that they could do. That I need to walk more, Chris, I need to drink more water, I need to laugh more, be more mindful, sleep better, all these things. What I find, Rowena, it's not a knowledge gap, it's a value gap. And in order for people to go from ideation, I know what I'm supposed to do, into action, means they have to have permission and they need to have capacity to be able to do that. So the self-regulation piece, all I would say to your audience is that it's not selfish to do things for yourself. The calling of the teacher is to give externally always. And I meet beautiful teachers who want to be the best teacher and the best friend and the best parent. And I just think sometimes that self-regulation piece is, you know, create some time and space for yourself. It's not selfish and it's very easy. It doesn't have to be a large chunk of your day. It can be small incremental pieces where habits form.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
one part. The second part to that is find an accountability buddy, if you like. Find a mentor, find a coach. Because the language I hear from teachers is that I feel isolated. I feel like I'm on my own. And the first thing we have to do is sense check that. Are you really isolated? Are you really on your own? And then secondly, you will find that there are other people feeling the same way as you. And so what we want to do is create those conversations around how do we shift you out of that? How do we move you forward? How do we support you better? All I can say in those one-to-one conversations.
Okay, that's amazing. I love that, especially because I have a preventing teacher burnout group in Facebook, and teachers and leaders go in there, and I just almost daily put in some tips or some strategies or some ideas. And
Yeah,
I think we really need each other to be able to, as you say, be accountable, perhaps. And best is one to one. And my journals come out, Burnout Busting Teachers Journal, and again, I suggest to people that they do it with somebody, because then, you can say, oh my goodness, can you believe today we were told we needed a goal for the week? What's your
mm,
goal? How are you going
mm,
to make it happen? Really helpful. It's a bit like having your own personal coach, but it's your buddy at school.
it is. It's important to find the right person. I made the mistake many times of finding someone I liked, who would agree with me and would just go with me whatever I decided. Or sometimes we would just meet up and have a little bit of a whinge session. What I discovered though, once I find that right person who's willing to positively push me and challenge me
Yeah.
and really to extend my thinking and stretch my my capacity, I find those people really allow me to strive in the right direction. So I will say that my caveat is always find that right person.
Yeah, the person who's going to challenge and stretch you. I love that. I,
Hmm.
I had a coach, coaching client earlier, and she said, Ro, you're making me write down so many things that I'm doing. And I'm saying, well, actually, it's you that's coming up with the ideas, and I'm just going to hold you accountable in the next session, whether you've done
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. The power of a great coaching conversation and a curious mindset can move mountains.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I'm very aware that, teachers individually don't have a lot of spare money, and schools don't often buy coaches in. So it's really about finding our own person who's willing to challenge us and walk through that with us so that we're growing.
Mm. And I see a coaching culture, not slipping, that's the wrong term, but I see a coaching culture being adopted into education. The other day, sixth formers were coming into my class to coach year sevens. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And whether it's a different type of coaching, I understand that, but it's the acceptance of coaching itself. That's creating the coaching culture, which I love.
Really good. Well, Chris, I love what you've said to us today. And I think one of the things I've taken away is, we actually have the knowledge, and it's about taking action for ourselves. And that sometimes can be a bit brave. It can be a bit uncomfortable, but it's what we're doing. And if people want to get hold of you, Chris, because they might even, if there's teachers listening, they might go to their boss and say, oh, we want Chris Wilson into our school, please. Where would they find you?
So I play very much on LinkedIn. However, I thought about this, Rowena, and I did wonder, I'm not a plugger, but do you know what I love the most is, I'll sit in someone's inbox, they might do a little bit of research, and then life goes on. We get on with our day, we start, 1,000 to-do lists come into so often Chris Wilson tends to go somewhere else. All I would ask is that I'd love to have a human conversation. If you've got any questions, or, I can give you, Rowena, my phone number or my contacts. Let's have a human conversation around how you're going, what you need. If it's at the board level, then great. Let's look at solutions and how we might create something that you've already invested in, or what's coming up for you. If it's at a personal level, then it's just a human conversation.
Okay. So I'll put that into the blurb for the podcast in case anyone wants to know. All right. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris. And thanks everybody for listening.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Rowena.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.